Hi, this is Rabbi Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Whether you're watching with our friends over at Tony Time, or wherever you watch or listen to your podcast, as always, exciting to have you along for the experience. And we have a special sponsorship for this episode. In fact, I think the entire episode is going to be the sponsorship. Hi, Rabbi Orlofsky. Okay, I'm assuming that you were referring to me on the Pesach podcast when you spoke about someone who wants to sponsor, and you know who you are, unless maybe there were others. But here it is, your dearest and closest friend, the one who sat with you by all the meals at the Project Inspire convention, who tried super hard to entertain and be entertained, the one who is cousins with Yitzi Moeller. Actually, it's my wife's cousin. The one who listens to your podcasts from Texas to Florida and from Chicago to Baltimore on all my work trips. Yes, the Yisrael Schwartz. You were the main reason I came to Project Inspire conference. It's convention. I've been loving each and every one of your podcasts, and I hope when I grow up, I get to be like you. Well, just take poor care of yourself physically, and you'll get there. Please make sure and mention that this podcast is in honor of my dear wife, Miriam Leah, who always puts up with me and my nonsense and lets me play you in the car on our long trips from Baltimore. In memory of Reuven, Tzvi, Ben, Menachem, Yitzchok, who is always in our hearts, and a Refuah Shleimah for Ouriel ben Tzipora and Lavi ben Shiran, in memory of all who died in the war, and a Zechus for the hostages, but really because we are dear friends and go way back together, in honor of you, that Hashem should continue giving you strength to inspire others while you make them laugh. Please make sure to mention how we are really good and dear friends who hit it off and go way back together, probably back to other Gilgulim. Send you lots of love, Yisrael Schwartz. Well, that's it for the next week. If you want to find out more about the podcast, this actually is an interesting story. My first Project Inspire convention that I went to, all of the other faculty members were sitting together, and I was sitting at a table with couples from Borough Park and Lakewood, and I was kind of surprised. I didn't have my wife with me. Why wasn't I sitting with, the other faculty people? And I asked them, they said, you were requested. People wanted to sit with you and be able to ask you questions. It was so interesting that there were Hasidic couples and Litvish couples, and they were just asking basic questions on Judaism every meal that we sat together, which I, of course, found absolutely fascinating. I'm very happy to do it. But at this last convention, I also got to sit with my good friend Moshe David and his son, and of course with the Schwartzes, as he's already mentioned. And he says, we're really very good friends, and I expect you to mention that. So here's a shout out, and it's good to hear from you and to see you and all the other people at my table who I had the zechus to be able to spend time with and to bond with. Okay. Well, it is after Pesach, and we start Sfiras, and Sfiras is a process. I've said this many times, that Rabbi Kalish of Waterbury, who is one of the master mechanchim of our generation, and I say that knowing, of course, that he has no time to listen to podcasts, so this will never get back to him, but I have had an opportunity to have dealings with him, and He has a lot of tremendous insights for our generation. And one of the things he says is respect the process. There's a process. And we don't always understand that there's a process, and it's necessary to go through the process to achieve what we're trying to achieve. Everyone knows already that in my misspent youth, I did research into what was the craze at my time, which was, of course, comic books. I read them only before to give me an insight into society. But I remember a Flash comic where I think he was fighting Captain Cold. I'm trying to remember. But he had the flu. And the Flash was having trouble doing what he had to do because he had the flu. Even though the Flash has very fast healing powers, but, So what did they used to say when I was a kid? if you have the flu. Rest, drink lots of fluids, and take Bear aspirin. This was a Bear aspirin commercial, which, by the way, was the first aspirin. It was the first modern medicine that was ever developed. It was a German company called Bayer. And in the reparations against Germany after World War I, America got the patent for aspirin. And so they changed Bayer, which I think was B-A-E-R, to Bayer, B-A-Y-E-R. And they started marketing Bayer aspirin. But anyway, so the Flash realizes that it's just too hard for him to fight all the bad guys. So he takes a couple of bottles of aspirin and quickly, swallows them along with lots of liquids. And then he collapses because he forgot you also have to rest. And so, of course, the bad guys come in and they find him passed out and they carry him away to kill him, which is a typical bad guy thing, why they don't just shoot him when they have the chance. There was a TV show in the 60s, Batman, and every single time they would tie him to this or they would hang him from that. And why didn't they just shoot him, I never saw it, but someone told me there was a takeoff on the old James Bond movies called Austin Powers, and the bad guy is planning some kind of elaborate way to kill him. And he says, why don't we just shoot him? He goes, you don't know anything about being a villain. Yeah. So luckily, being the Flash, he's able to rest super fast. So as they're carrying him away, whatever amount of time it is, he suddenly wakes up and at super speed knocks out all the bad guys. And the reason the Flash keeps getting caught, by the way, is because he's stupid, which is surprising because he's really bright. He's a scientist, but he runs in at super speed and then stops to have a whole conversation and give them long enough time to use whatever weapons they have on him, as opposed to just running, picking them up and dropping them off at jail, which is what I would do if I had super speed. But more on this as we move along. So you need the time to rest. And if you don't rest, you're not going to get healthy. When I had my bypass operation, I took it very slow, recovering. I know somebody else who had a bypass operation and jumped right back into things and ended up not doing so well because you need time to recover. Yeah. There are certain things that just take time. It's a process. The Ramban says in Shmos that traveling from Mitzrayim to Har Sinai is a 3-day journey as the crow flies. Well, since this was in Egypt, I would say, as the ibis flies. Yeah, it's a 3-day journey. So it should have only taken them 3 days. It took them 7 weeks. Why? Respect the process. They needed the time in order to be able to develop themselves, to be able to receive the Torah. Without preparation, you're not going to be successful at anything. I've mentioned this idea in the past in different contexts. The Dubna Magid gives a marshal about this guy who is barely able to buy his family bread. They're scrimping and saving. And one day, whatever his job is, takes him to a fancy part of town, and there's a big glass window, bay window, and he looks inside, and he sees this guy sitting at a table, and next to him is a little silver bell sitting on a little velvet pillow, and he rings the bell, and this fellow comes out and brings him a fish course. He rings the bell, takes it away, they bring him soup. Rings the bell, they bring him roast beef, potatoes, vegetables. Rings the bell, they take it away, they bring him dessert, coffee. The fellow is amazed. He's never seen anything like this. And with whatever money he has, he goes out and buys himself a little velvet pillow and a little silver bell. And he sits down with his family and he says, children, tonight we're going to eat like we've never eaten before. Fish, roast beef, soup, dessert. He rings the bell, nothing happens. Rings the bell again. So he goes back and says, you sold me a defective bell. He says, what are you talking about? He says, I watched this other guy who rang the bell and people brought him food. He goes, he hired a cook. He hired a butler. He bought the food. He gave them all the materials to be able to do it. All the preparation went into it. The bell was just the siman. If you don't do everything else, then the bell's not going to work. Says the Dubna Magid Lamadav to people who go into Tekiah Shaifa and they wait for it to move them. And nothing happens because there's no preparation that went into it. If you didn't spend a whole Elul preparing yourself for Tekiah Shaifa, then you go in and you hear the Shaifa and okay, it's not having an effect on you because you didn't do the work for it to be able to have the effect. Yeah. A similar thing is for people who visit the Kaisel for the first time and they expect something magical to take place. They're going to get up there and suddenly the clouds are going to part and a ray of light will shine on them and the angels will sing and they'll be moved with a feeling of deep religiosity and spirituality, and they'll touch the wall and tears will come to their eyes as they connect with thousands of years of Jewish history. Or they'll see a wall. That's what it is. It's a wall. It's an old wall. Wonder what this guy wants, That's in French, Puts it back in. Because you didn't do the preparation. You have to prepare yourself to be able to have an experience. So all of Sfiras HaOmer is a time of preparation. We need to prepare ourselves for Matan Torah. You can't just walk into Matan Torah. Otherwise, the Kodesh Baruch Hu could have given it to us right away. But we weren't ready. We were on the lowest level of Tumah, and we had to build ourselves up. There are people who are realistic. And they say, I'm not ready to date to get married yet. I have work to do. There are some people who don't do the work and they get married. And it affects their relationship. And it affects their children. Because they didn't do the work that needed to be done beforehand. Sof ma'aseh v'machshavat chila, there has to be preparation in order for you to be able to see success in what you're doing. That's the nature. And a person who doesn't put in the work, doesn't put in the effort, you're not going to see it. We had a neighbor once that used to sell like health food. And she told me once she was very upset because somebody ordered a carrot cake and they refused to pay for it. Said it wasn't good. Says, why? He goes, I don't know. I used all my usual ingredients. Said, did you do anything different? He goes, well, I was sort of, pressed for time. So instead of taking the carrots and grating them on the fine grater, I did it on the chunk side. So she made a carrot cake with carrot chunks in it. And it's more than just chewy. You understand? It's like, that's not what a carrot cake is supposed to be. I said, well, you cut corners, and that's the reason that you ended up with what you ended up with. We mentioned this about making latkes, and we mentioned this about making schnitzels. One of the most important things is you have to make sure that the oil is hot before you put it in, or it's not going to start to brown, and it's going to stick to the bottom of the pan, and the whole thing will fall apart. Same thing with the matzah brai. You made your matzah brais on Pesach. Those of you who keep eating matzah till Shavuos, so you can still do this, you have to make sure that the oil is hot enough when you pour it in. Otherwise, it's going to become a glop. You could salvage it by making like scrambled egg matzah, which is not a matzah brai, but listen, different strokes for different folks. But the point is that you have to wait until things are done. You have to preheat the oven very often for different kinds of dishes. If you have a chicken order coming, make sure and plug in the freezer beforehand so it gets nice and cold. Don't wait until afterwards and then say, oh, I'll stick the chickens into the basically warm freezer and then plug it in. That's not going to be good for you unless you appreciate bacterial growth. Then it's very good. Yeah. But respect the process. I mentioned this dafka now after Pesach, and I'll put it into a context for you. By Nazir, it says the following. Why is the parasha of Saita? Saita is a woman who is suspected of adultery. And it's not just that the husband picked up the phone and someone hung up or something like that. He saw his wife staying alone with Bob. So he gives her a hasra in front of witnesses and says, do not be alone with Bob in a closed room for the amount of time necessary to have relations. Very specific. And two witnesses say, yes, she was alone in a room with Bob for that amount of time. Now I know some people are going to say to me, well, you don't need two witnesses for this and two witnesses for that, and the whole sugya and saita. Fine. Fine. Cut me a little slack. I'm not learning saita here. Anyway, so she, that's it. She is now forbidden to her husband. And it's not just suspicion. He told her specifically not to be alone with this guy in a room. It means if they go out for a cappuccino in a public cafe, one could question the propriety, but that doesn't make her a sota. You have to be alone in a room with this guy for that period of time, and we have evidence that this took place. At that point, the Torah said she's hasa. The woman says, I didn't do anything. It's just, I really love playing chess, and you don't like to play chess, so, we need a quiet place to play chess. Maybe. But I told you specifically not to. I guess you would have to have gone to the park to one of those big chess tables and, played chess over there. But, you can't just, do this after I told you specifically that I'm suspicious of this guy and his intentions. So that's it. They have to get divorced. By the way, this applies today. If a man gives a sota warning to his wife, what we call kinoi, and then we have evidence that she, in fact, violated that understanding and was alone with this guy, they have to get divorced. There's no way out of that. Yeah. But in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the woman said, I am innocent. And the man says, I fear the lady does protest too much. And Shakespeare said, that's a cool line. Let me write that down. And she says, no, I'll do anything to prove my innocence. So God says, okay, I have an option for you. We'll take you to the Beis HaMikdash. I'm going to make this little magic water where we take some of the dirt of the floor of the Beis HaMikdash and mix it in with some water from the kior in the Beis HaMikdash. And I'll write up a little, text along with God's name on a piece of paper, and I'll dissolve it in the water, and you'll drink it. And if you're innocent, then you will have children, and the children will be healthy, and you'll have easier birth, and everything will be good. And if not, then you will basically fall apart. Not like fall apart emotionally, but like physically. Like parts of you will start dropping off, and, kaboom. In fact, when they see she drank it and she was lying and she's her eyes start to bulge, they take her outside and say, uh-oh, let's not blow her up here in the Beis HaMikdash, Take her outside. Yeah. And that's what takes place. Yeah. That's the saita. Now, the Chachamim really don't want her to die, because there is evidence that this woman acted inappropriately. She might just be hoping that she can get away with it. And the Gemara tells different stories about women who tried tricks to get away with it. Like, for example, one woman sent her twin sister in, and she passed the test. And when she came back, her sister came to her and she says, oh, thank you so much. And he kisses her, and some of the water gets inside of her and she blows up, So, but there were people who tried all kinds of tricks. They figured they would try something. For example, the water doesn't work if your husband's not faithful. And it could be that she suspected her husband, which is why she turned in her time of need to Bob in the first place, and she's counting on that. But we don't want to see this lady blow up. Walk away. Walk away. Make a new life for yourself. Yeah? As long as there's life, there's hope. We don't want to see anybody die if we can avoid it. Yeah? And even if people do terrible, terrible things, there's always an opportunity that I can turn my life around and still do something good in this world. And we'd like to see you not die. So we make her carry her mincha around with her to get her tired. We bring her over here. We bring her over there. We do all kinds of things. At some point, a guy is by the base of Mikdash bringing a korban, and he sees the Saita Bekil Kula. He sees this woman going through what they call the ordeal of the sota. And it's an ordeal. But it's with the best of intentions, because we want her to admit, she doesn't even have to admit it. She just has to say, you know what? I don't need this. If my husband's going to make me go through this whole thing, then forget about it. I don't want to be married anymore. Which is, obviously, if you're innocent, you'll say, listen, I'll do anything to prove my innocence. But she can always say, I don't need this. I don't have to take this. I don't have to be treated this way. I don't have to be spoken to like this. There are people who are like that. You come in and your roommate's using your computer. You say, what are you doing? And they go, what? First thing is always go with denial. What? He says, why are you using my computer? So I didn't think you would mind. He says, I've told you at least 4 times not to use my computer without permission. So what do you care? The electricity, I'll pay for it. It's not an issue of that. It's my computer and you can't use it without permission. Okay, what do you want to say? I'm a thief? You want to call me a thief? Fine. So that's not what I'm saying. You're raising your voice. I don't have to talk to you anymore. And they turn it around. That they're the hurt party. This happens to be a brilliant technique if you can master it. I had a nephew who was learning in a yeshiva, and Baruch Hashem, I have a lot of nephews, and there are a lot of yeshivas. So I'm not giving away any particular information. But he liked to go out with his friends at night, and he would tell the mashgiach that he's homesick and he's going to his uncle. That was me. He's going to his uncle for for dinner that night because he's lonely and he's homesick. Fine. So he does this a bunch of times, and the mashgiach is beginning to get a little suspicious. So he calls my wife. Now, if he called me, I was a mashgiach, I would know exactly what was going on. I could have covered for him, but my wife is very, very honest. Very hard for her to lie. Yeah. I'm better at it. I've practiced, always with the best of intentions. That's a lie. Anyway, but so she doesn't know how to lie, and he didn't see it coming, So mashgiach calls up and says, listen, how's your nephew so-and-so doing? He says, well, I think he's doing well, do you think he's homesick? So I didn't really see him be homesick. It looks like he's pretty secure. Because maybe you should invite him over for dinner. Because, okay, does he ever come over for dinner? Because, not really. When was the last time you saw him? I came for Shabbos about 4 weeks ago. He said, okay, thank you very much. So the next day he sees him. He says, where were you last night? So I went to my uncle's house for dinner. He says, really? Because I spoke to your aunt and she says she hasn't seen you in a month. So he's telling me the story over. He goes, so I'm caught. So what do I do? So I go, you called up my aunt? Oh my gosh, that's the only family I have here. You just ruined my entire relationship. Now they think I'm a liar. I have no place to go anymore. Why would you do that? Just ask me if I was lying. I would have told you if I was lying. Well, you can't. He goes, what do you mean? Why couldn't you do this? Oh my gosh, you went and called her up behind my back. Now what am I going to do with that? Anyway, by the end, he was apologizing to him. You know what I mean? So, fine. So she could just say, I don't need this, and she could walk out, which, by the way, we'd be very happy with because we don't want, to see anybody get blown up. And that's why we're doing this. This poor guy sees this woman going through this disgrace. And the Chazal say the next parsha is the parsha of Nazir, where a person takes upon himself a vow to become a Nazir. a Nazarite. I don't know if that helps you. I never understood why, if you don't understand the Hebrew term, well, you'll understand the English term, which makes no more sense than the Hebrew term. You know, it was like my good friend Rashi Simon, I was by him for an event, and he announces, next Saturday night, we're going to be starting the penitential prayers. And I said, do you think there's anybody who doesn't know what slichos are and know what penitential prayers are? Just say slichos. No one knows the difference anyway, you know? Gosh, is there anybody who, if you say tefillin, they don't know what you're talking about, and you say phylacteries, they go, oh, why didn't you say so? I never got that. But anyway, but if you're Nazarite, like that better, you know, a Nazir. This is a person who takes upon themselves not to drink wine. And because they're not going to drink wine, they can't have grape juice, they can't eat grapes, they can't eat raisins, you know, no grape products. Grape jelly, no grape skins, grape pits. You can have grape nut cereal because it's not really grape nuts. Yeah, but apparently they taste like them, which I think is really appealing. Anyway, so it's like, I don't know why they thought this would be clever that they copied from Harry Potter these all flavor jelly beans. So you get a bag of jelly beans and there are like really disgusting tasting ones in them. Was that really necessary? Is there anybody who wants a vomit flavored, you know, jelly bean? You just want to see the shock on their face, you know? On this subject, why do they make all these different candies in different flavors when people only want cherry? They pick out all the cherry ones and, you know, and they stick in these black licorice ones that nobody wants. So what are you doing? Anyway, just giving a shout out there to the candy makers. Yeah. And when you make them, you know, you can do it because you mix it with love and make the world feel good. Anyway, he sees this and he becomes a Nazir. Why? Because he looks at the situation and says, how did we get here? There was a process of bad decisions that brought us to this moment. I've mentioned this before. When I ran NCSY in Long Island in the 1980s, we'd go to the printer to make up our flyers. And the printer would have these, this is, you know, they would make like a master. It was like moment like a mimeograph machine. They'd make a master and they'd copy it off of that, you know. It had that smell of ink. It was very exciting. Not like a dry paper copier today. But so they had these print things that hand out. And one of them was called, you know it's going to be a bad day when. And one of them was, you know it's going to be a bad day when you wake up face down in the gutter naked. That was 40 years ago I saw that. And I still think about it to this day. When you wake up face down naked in the gutter, you have to think to yourself, how did this happen? What were the circumstances that led to this event? There was obviously a series of very poor decisions that I made that brought me here. Yeah. You know how when, you know, Mark Twain says, people who tell the truth have less to remember, you know? And you try to lie your way out of a situation, the lie just becomes another lie and another lie, you know? So when I was in Hank, I was going into 7th grade. And the way it worked there was to get your secular books, it was provided by your local school district. So you had to go down to the school district and pick up your books. Well, at the end of the year, they would give you a form to fill out to submit to the school district. This was way too much effort and commitment for me to possibly do that. So it's the beginning of the year, and I don't have any school books because I never filled out the form. So I go down, and I figure, yeah, I'll play it by ear. I'll wing it, you know? So he says, yeah. I said, I've come here to get my school books, you know? So what school you in? You know, Hebrew Academy of Mass Accounting. So he looks, he says, oh, you must be so-and-so. Now, so-and-so had filled out a form, and he wasn't coming back for 7th grade. And I thought to myself, yes, that's me. And he kept calling me by this guy's name, Mark. He goes, well, Mark. I said, that was very interesting. And that, oh, you live on such and such, that. And I'm just compounding this with lie after lie to him. And I said, okay, I got to tell you the truth. I'm not him. I forgot to fill out a form. And I was just so humiliated, but I just couldn't keep it going for that long. It was too hard. Today I'd have no problem, but back then I just broke under the weight of one lie on top of another, and in the end the guy was like, "You should have just told me, and I would have given you a form to fill out." Stupid. Anyway, but you realize that there are consequences. So he's supposed to yaz yayin. Why? Because he looks at this woman and says, how did this happen? He says, Kalas Reish. Kalas Reish, says in Pirkei Avos. Kalas Reish brings it to Erva. She was fooling around. And in fact, isn't that the word they use for it in the vernacular? Yeah, we're just fooling around. Yeah, that's what they were doing. They were fooling around. How does it get that way? It starts off with a couple of drinks. And he says, and that's what they say to the woman before they give her. He says, BT, my daughter, wine has a bad effect on people, causes them to make poor decisions. Maybe this, maybe that. We're trying to say we understand that you made a series of bad decisions that brought you here now. You don't have to die because of them, even though you've made bad decisions. Yeah? I've told this over before, but the greatest Mussar Shmuz I ever got in my life was not from a Rosh Hashiva or a Mashgiach or a Rebbe. It was from a Nassau County police officer, because I took the road test in New York 4 times and failed. Blatant anti-Semitism. One guy said I went through a stop sign. Yeah, right. Anyway, but so I went to California, and California is very laid back. They don't even make you parallel park there, and you don't have to make an appointment. In New York, I don't know about today, but you'd have to take the written test, and then you had to ask for an appointment, and then they would mail you a date for an appointment. Then you came in and you took the test, and then you waited 2 weeks for an answer. And if you failed, then you had to do the whole thing again. And if you failed that time, you had to take the written test over again. Anyway, after 4 times, I said, okay, I don't really need to drive. I went out to LA. You just take the test, you get online, and the guy's like, okay, so you want to drive? And I'm like, sure. Okay, let's go. You want to make a right? Okay. Hey, great. Train tracks. What do you do with train tracks? We stop and look. That's right. Okay, now you can go. Can you back up the car 50 feet? Yeah, I could do that. Oh, very good. Okay, here's your license. I love driving in Los Angeles. It was wonderful. And that's why 3 days later, I was driving. 3 days after I went. And there's suddenly a cop car behind me. And, I'm only driving for 3 days. And I get nervous. And another cop car pulls up next to me. And another cop car pulls up on the other side of me. So I'm like, whoa. So they pull me over because they thought I was drunk, And they say, license, please. And I hand it to him and goes, 3 days? You driving for 3 days? Why were you driving like that? He goes, I had 3 cop cars surrounding me. I thought you thought I was a serial killer coming in to take me away. I was kind of nervous, you know what I mean? But so I had a California license. And when I came back to New York, they said, there's no reciprocity between California and New York. I said, what does that mean? He says, well, if you get a ticket in New York and they give you points, they also give you points in New Jersey. There's reciprocity, but there's no reciprocity between New York and California. Now, in my 20-something brain, what that meant was I'm invisible to the authorities. I can do whatever I want. So every time I would speed, I'd get a speeding ticket and I'd throw it away because there's no reciprocity. Anyway, one time, it was late at night. I was coming back from something. I was going 45 miles in a 30-mile-an-hour thing, but there was nobody around at the middle of the night, and the guy pulls me over. And he says, license and registration. I give it to him. He goes, you're driving with a suspended license. I said, no, I have a California license. There's no reciprocity. He says, do you know what that means? And for the moment, I realized, no, I don't really know what that means. He says, it means that we cannot suspend your driving privileges in California. If you had a New Jersey license, we could suspend them both in New York and New Jersey. But we can suspend them in New York, and we have because you have gotten a lot of speeding tickets, and you didn't take care of them. And at the moment, I realized that I was lying face down, naked in the gutter. And I said, I don't want. He goes, this is a misdemeanor. I could take you to jail. I said, I don't want to go to jail. He says, now listen to me. You're not a bad person, but you did something stupid and you have to face the consequences. I'm going to let you drive home. Get yourself a lawyer and solve this, because this is a misdemeanor. This is a crime. This is not just a speeding violation. It's not just a traffic violation. So I got myself a lawyer, paid him a few $1,000s, paid a few $1,000s in fines. I learned that the guy with the most points doesn't win when it comes to driving. I had points on my license for like the next 10 years. And I drove a lot better afterwards. But what a mussar schmooze. You're not a bad person, but you did something stupid, and now you have to face the consequences. And I understood that. That's true. Yeah. So this fellow's looking at the sota and realizes, what got her here? He says, because she's sitting around drinking and going out to bars and having fun, and that's what got her into trouble. So I am yazi asmamadi yayin. I am not going to drink wine. At the end of his 30 days, Stam Naziris is 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, he shaves off all his hair, and he goes to the Beis Hamikdash, and he brings korbanos. And one of the korbanos he brings is a korban chatas. Why does he bring a korban chatas? Says Rabbi Elazar Kapar, because yazia atzmo min yayin, because he denied himself wine. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us wine to be able to enjoy it, just like everything he gave us to enjoy it. And you asked it on yourself, and for denying yourself that pleasure, you have to bring a korban chatas, a sin offering. It's a steer in Rashi. First he says, if you see a sota in a disgrace, you should become a nazir. Then he says you have to bring a korban chatas. Why? Because you became a nazir. So the Sifsei Chachamim answers and says, well, that's because you should have only sworn off wine and not grapes and grape juice and raisins and all those kind of things that you also denied yourself for. I thought there's a different answer that you could give, and that is that you're right. You had no choice to become a nazir. But that's not a positive thing to do. You should not deny yourself wine. Ella what? You had a trauma. You suffered a trauma, and because of this trauma, you have no choice but to go through a therapy. And the therapy is to go without wine, not because that's a good thing, but that's what you have to do. I was working with a young lady who was having all kinds of problems in life and in her marriage and things like that. And we sat down to discuss it and to see what was going on. I am not a therapist, but I try to help people as best as I can. And it came out that she lived in a very abusive home. And it took me a long time to get her to understand and see it. And when she finally did, she says, so how come my brothers don't see it? And I said, they probably do. But just like you, nobody ever sat down with them and, went over a chapter and verse for them to see. So she asked her two brothers to come and join her for the next time that we met and see whether or not they could validate what I was saying. So one of the brothers says to me, who says it's mutter to talk badly about my father? Kibbutz. I said, you're right. It's not mutter to speak badly about your father. But if there's a trauma that you need to deal with, then you have no choice. You have to do it. Just like a sick person who the doctor says has to eat pig eats pig. So too, if you have no choice, this is what you do. You don't have a choice. You have to do what you have to do. The end result was that this brother kept himself out of the conversation, and the other brother, who was arguing with me in the end, had like a breakdown because he suddenly realized what he had grown up with and what he had gone through, and he had never realized it before, and completely fell apart. But the answer is sometimes you have to go to therapy, and even though you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara, if that's what I need to do in order for me to correct the situation. So when you have the need to go through a therapy, even though that's not ideal, it's what you need to do. I have a good friend who was my neighbor in Far Rockaway, Chanoch Sat. It was Henry when I know him, but people find religion in their old age. So my wife still calls me Dave. What can I tell you? I was like, I was speaking once in Long Island, and I was known by my nickname Ouriel at the time, which goes back to my magic years when I was the amazing Ouriel. Anyway, so that was my nickname, So one of my former advisors in NCSY saw a sign that I was speaking in the 5 towns, and she says, "Oh, look, David's giving a shir." And there was a gasp. These 2 seminary girls come to her and say, "That's Rabbi Orlofsky Shlita." She says, "I didn't say Orlo. I thought that was pretty good." So, it was pretty good. Anyway, that's the concept of Ein Navi Be'iro, where you grew up, There's, "Oh, look, little Shaiki is going to say Refuah. Go ahead, Shaiki, say over the road, So Yeshayahu had to start in a different town. I'm not going to be a Navi over here with all the people I grew up with, So he suffered from ileitis. And they kept giving him steroids and all kinds of different stuff. And, it was making him pretty sick, but there's no cure for ileitis, So he went to this Rav who's supposed to have natural cures. And he put him on the grape diet. You can only eat grapes. He says, grapes is the worst thing for ileitis. You can't digest it. It's terrible. Just eat grapes. And that's what he did. Yeah, I think it was for a year. He only ate grapes. And he becomes something of a grape connoisseur. He says to me, I could taste grapes that had been washed for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I could taste the difference in the grape. Anyway, it went away. It went away. He went to his doctor afterwards, and sure enough, he no longer had ileitis. He says, it must have been you never had it because ileitis can't be cured. So slowly he was able to introduce other fruits and other vegetables, and then a little chicken, and then a little meat, After a while, he was back to eating a regular diet. It cured him, the grape therapy. But 1 week out of the year, he has to go back on the grape diet. And for a week, he just eats grapes. He says he does it during the fall. That's when the grapes are cheaper, And he only eats grapes for a week. And that somehow cleans out his system or does whatever it has to do, and then he can go back to eating regularly. I don't know if he's still doing it, but I know that was the treatment. In Vayikra, we're told to bring a korban mincha. We're told, do not bring any chametz and do not bring any dvash. Because dvash represents taiva. There's a sweetness. And that's why their default dvash in the Torah, Eretz Vas Chalav Dvash, the dvash is tamarim and te'enim, right? And tamar, which is very sweet, a date, there are two women in Tanakh whose name is Tamar, and both of them are associated with Taiva. And chametz represents gaiva. Why? Because you take a nice flat matzah and you blow it up into a white bread. That's gaiva. And that has no place in our avodas Hashem. But we eat bread. That's true. All year we eat bread. But sometimes we forget to keep our mind on the focus. So for a week, we don't eat grapes. We eat matzah. And we take out the chametz from our diet in order to remove it. That's 1 week of therapy. That's our grape diet. That's us becoming a nazir. Not because that's the ideal, because that's the therapy that we need. Because there's a process. There's a process that I have to go through in order to me to be able to cleanse my system and get it out of my system and slowly reorient myself back to everyday life. We spoke about this before Sukkot, where we go out of our houses for a week and we don't have a roof over our head. And then we come back inside of our house and we have one last day, Shmini Atzeres, where we have to do the same koyach of Sukkot inside of our house. Because you got to respect the process. So as we come out of Pesach, cleansed and pure, having removed all of those chametz toxins from our body, and we start anew, Mitzvah Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu should allow us to be able to eat the chametz in a way that brings us that kedusha. And now the question and answer portion of our program. By Anonymous, is there a difference in saying the cholam nekuda as o or oi? There's two different ways of doing it. Each one has proofs. Yeah. You'll find in certain piyutim, the rhyme only works if you say O. And then you find certain places where it only works if you say Oi. So there are proofs this way and that way. And the general rule is, of course, to follow your minhag. If you ask me which one is right, of course, O, because that's what I say. But if you have the minhag of saying Oi, what can I say? Follow your custom. That's it's like when it comes to Nusach Ashkenaz and Nusach Sfarad, what Moshe Feinstein said, you can't change your Nusach. Unless you're changing from Nusach Sfarad back to Nusach Ashkenaz, because originally everybody davened Ashkenaz, and Sfarad was an innovation. Diane Weiss said, you can't change your Nusach HaTfilah unless you're switching from Ashkenaz to Sfarad, because the Arizal told us that's the correct one. So, like I say, whatever you're doing, you should be doing it with the intention that you're doing Ratzon Hashem. By Anonymous, what is the Rav's take on showing physical touch between husband and wife in front of children? Does it give them a sense of security to see that their parents love each other? This should obviously not be the only way children should get this security, but it is an added benefit. I'm not talking about anything more than a hug, a kiss on the head, or holding hands, etc. I heard a story from somebody who had learned in Netzach Yisrael. I don't know what his source for the story was, but he said that Rav Gusman, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Netzach Yisrael, who was on Rav Chaim Oiz's Beis Din, used to walk through Geula holding his wife's hand. Kach Shemati. There certainly were different approaches over the years. There was a tremendous problem that when women came from Europe, when their daughters got married, they didn't go to mikveh. And when they said to them, why aren't you going to mikveh? He goes, why? My mother never did that. Because when the woman would go to the mikveh, she did it with so much modesty that nobody knew anything about it. And this is a process of, creates tremendous tension for a lot of women because they go to the mikveh. They don't want to tell their kids, hi, mommy's going to the mikveh now, So they have to come up with some kind of story, In Kiryat Sefer, the default is you say, I'm going to the supermarket. I forget which supermarket it is over there. I think maybe it's Zol Gadol, whatever it is. So I'm going to the supermarket. Anyway, the woman's in the mikveh and her phone rings. It's her daughter. So he says, where are you? He says, I told you, I went to the supermarket. He goes, well, I'm here and I don't see you. And, my wife was listening to these two women online saying how hard it is to try to fool their kids, So he says, I'm going to wherever it is. And the daughter says, I know where you're going. And it starts with an M. And she says, no, it doesn't. It starts with a Z. So I guess they sat there thinking, why should be going to the zoo in the middle of the night? But anyway, so I'm not saying that one should advertise it, obviously. I have 8 daughters. You can fool boys easier than you can fool girls. My daughters knew when my wife was pregnant a few hours after conception. They could already tell she was pregnant. I don't know how. They just have this sense. My wife can't lie, like I told you, So they figure out everything right away, But for years, she would always make up some story. We would coordinate what the story was beforehand in case they asked me. And again, I was much better at it. But years later, when they were all married, they said, we knew you were going to the mikveh. He goes, how did you know? He goes, you have this bag that you always take with you. It's the same bag. And once a month, you would take this bag with you, We knew exactly where you were going. But the point is that if it gets to the point where nobody understands that there's something important here, good. So you can wait till they get married and make sure that they learn this in their college classes and this and next thing and things like that. But again, you were talking about a world where there were no college classes, when people came to Europe in the 20s and 30s. But it's I think, an important thing to do. A person has to, make sure that their kids see it. I am in favor of having parents express affection, not infection, but affection. The affection can be infectious because it makes people more comfortable. They know mommy and daddy love each other, Abba and Ima, Probably not Tati and mommy, but it's okay. Let them see, like you say, and that's why, holding hands or something like that. I don't think that's a bad thing for kids to see. And ani ba'ad. That's my position. Anonymous. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is Avram Zuckerman. How are you able to daven for someone else? Why is it important to say their name? It's very interesting. When someone's sick, we go to a tzaddik to daven. Sometimes we ask everybody to daven. I have a list of names of people that I daven for, and I'm reminded of the story I heard of Moshe Feinstein once. He says, people come to me and ask me to daven for people. They never tell me afterwards what happened. Did they die? Did they get better? Should I keep davening? I don't know. So I got names on this list. Unfortunately, I've had to cross off 2 of them that I know of, but some of them are just people who approach me. I wouldn't even know how to track them down. And, it's a difficult situation. Yeah. But why do we go to a tzaddik and ask him to daven? So we have a concept here in Israel that we call protexia. Protexia means that you want to get your kid into a school and they don't want to accept them. So you call up somebody who is close to the person in charge and you ask them to put in a good word for you. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you just have to find the right protexia. I had a daughter who wanted to go to a particular school, and the fellow in charge said no, and he would never say why. And people who taught in the school went to him and said, this is a great girl. No. I tried this, that, all kinds of things. It didn't help. Didn't help. So came September, she had no school. All right, she found other things to do. Over Sukkot, I was in the supermarket. I wasn't at the mikvah. I was actually at the supermarket. And I meet an old neighbor. He's an American, not particularly connected. He said, what's the matter? I said, nothing. He goes, I could say something's the matter. So I tell him. He says, which school is it? He says, well, let me see if I can do something. I'm thinking to myself, what are you going to do? Who do you know? It ends up that his son married a girl, and the girl's grandmother is best friends with the fellow who's in charge of the school's mother. And so he told his son to tell his wife to call her grandmother. And the grandmother called her good friend. And the good friend called the son and said, you are going to take this girl. And he says, listen, Ima, I can't. There's an accident. He goes, no. My friend is asking me to do her a favor. You're going to accept this girl. And sure enough, they accepted her. She was a star, When you do something, it could be that when a Kadosh Baruch Hu looks at you, he says, I'm sorry, you deserve this to be sick for your sins. And so I go to Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says to Kadosh Baruch Hu, could you make this guy better? And Hashem says, no, but he deserves it. He goes, I know, but it's hurting me. It's upsetting me. He goes, oh, it's upsetting you. Oh, okay. For you, I'll make him better. That's how davening for somebody else works. I'm putting myself out there. I'm putting myself on the line, and I say, don't do it for him, do it for me. Yeah? And when you put yourself in that position, then you can make a big difference. Yeah? And I say it could be a tzaddik, it could be anybody. Like the famous story of the Aguna, who Reb Chaim Shmulevitz said saved the Mir during the 6-Day War. They were in this, they were hiding in the bomb shelter, and there were bombs falling over Yerushalayim. And this woman had been in Aguna for, I think, 20 years. Her husband wouldn't give her a get. And she stands up in the bomb shelter and she says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my husband has caused me all of this tsaros and all of these problems. And I'm going to forgive him now. And if that's chus, I'm asking you to forgive the Jewish people and save the yeshiva. And shortly afterwards, a bomb fell right on top of the Mir Yeshiva and didn't explode. Chaim Shmulevitz said, she saved the Mir Yeshiva. Now, why do you have to get the name right? Mel Brooks in The 2,000-Year-Old Man, he has this routine where Carl Reiner asks him, where do words come from? He says it's usually onomatopoeia. You take it from the sounds. So he says, well, like shower. He said, well, you turn on the shower and it starts going shh, and you walk and it's too hot. You go, ow, shower. That's where it comes from. He says, well, what about an egg? He says, if you listen very closely, as a chicken is laying an egg, you'll listen. He goes, egg. That's where it comes from. So he does a few other of this. And then he says, what about a nose? Why is a nose called a nose? Well, he says, why? Because otherwise it would be an ear. What kind of stupid question is that? And that's the bottom line. There's no necessarily rhyme or reason, why there's no butter and butterfly. You know what I mean? Words meld. There's a made up word combining weld and melt. And they come up with the word meld, a zipper in Hebrew is called a ritrach, because that's what it sounds like, ritrach. Yeah. Ping pong. Ping pong is because that's how it sounds. Ping pong, ping pong. You understand? So, that was what he said. He said, why is in tennis called a racket? He says, because they used to make it out of catgut. Did you ever try to get catgut out of a cat? Boy, does it make a racket. Not so in Hebrew. Every word in Hebrew is a strip of DNA. If you know what each letter represents, and you know what every 2-letter root represents, and you know what the 3rd letter added on represents, then you understand it's describing the essence. And between the shape of the letters and the gematria and all kinds of different things, it has different meaning to it. Your name defines who you are. Someone who has your name has your mazel. That's when a person gets sick, we change their name because we change their mazel. Yeah? Because this gezerah was made on him, and now I changed my name to Alta so-and-so or Refuah so-and-so, and now, I'm a different person. So your name determines, to a large extent, who you are, right? My daughter Yafa says to me, "What does my name mean?" I said, "Your name means beautiful." My son Yaakov says, "What does my name mean?" He who grasps the heel. Not quite as catchy. And it was downhill from there. Miriam means bitterness. Rachel's a sheep, Rivka's a cow. It's like, but Esther is God will hide his face from us. So, you work with what you got. Anyway, so your name that we daven for specifically is because that's what the person is. Obviously, if you don't know the name, so you say, please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, daven for this person. But if you know the name, it makes the tefillah that much more effective because we have a location of who we're davening for. And that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can leave a comment. You can ask a question. You can sign up for one of our online shiurim. And as I mentioned last time, we're looking to start another shiur. We're looking for suggestions, what people might want. Someone had an interesting question, is that I used to do a series in Ouriel of answering the basic questions on Judaism. Maybe to do a series on that. I don't know, because I've done so many of them in the question and answer. If somebody wants to go Seder, where we go through questions systematically as opposed to non-systematically, that's an idea. And any other suggestions you might have. You could sponsor an episode. We need sponsors. We're not going to be able to keep producing the show. I hate to go dark on you, but takes money to make this happen, and it's good people like you who make that happen. So if you'd like to sponsor an episode and sponsor a question and answer, you can do it in honor of a loved one, in memory of a loved one. You can do it in honor of a disliked or tolerated one. We don't care. We take the money and we'll say whatever you want us to say. I want to give a shout out to my brother-in-law. That lowlife never had a job in his life. He always said I wouldn't remember him. I remember you. This podcast is being sponsored because of you. I'll say it. I don't care. And corporate sponsors, are welcome. And that's it for this episode. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.